Hello everybody. So today I am sharing my cinnamon roll recipe. What makes this recipe unique is that it is gluten-free, dairy-free, egg-free, and soy-free, which makes this also vegan. I am a gluten-free baker with celiac disease, and this has been a staple whenever I used to do the farmer's market. These would always sell out. I rarely ever had one left over by the end of the day. So let's get into this video. First of all, I will say I do weigh all of my ingredients because it is more accurate. However, I will try to provide the cup measurements for those that don't have a scale on hand. To start off, I measure out 113 grams or a half a cup of sugar in a medium-sized bowl. I then add 16 ounces of warmed rice milk to this. You can use any type of milk choice for this that you wish. I just use rice milk because it's usually allergy-free and it's what I have on hand. And I warm this in the microwave for about 1 to 2 minutes, depending on the microwave setting. On top of that, I sprinkle 1 packet of active dry yeast, not instant yeast. Give this a good stir. And then cover with saran wrap. I will set this aside for 10 minutes and let the yeast wake up. And while I'm waiting on that, I will measure out the dry ingredients. Using another medium-sized bowl, I add a sifter on top to sift the flour. And then I measure out 595 grams or 4 1/4 cup of flour. I would recommend using a 1-to-1 ratio gluten-free flour. Here I'm using Bob's Red Mill. And to this, I'm adding 1 teaspoon of baking powder and 2 teaspoons of salt. Sift all of that together and set the flour mixture aside. You will also need to set aside about a cup of flour for later in the recipe. Next, we need to measure out the butter and then melt it. So I'm going to grab a smaller microwavable bowl and add 113 grams or a half a cup of butter to it. And then microwave this until it's all melted. And then set this aside. By now, the yeast should be ready to go. You should see bubbles on top and it will have a yeasty smell. You're going to add this to the dry ingredients, making sure to scrape out all of the sugar from the bottom. We are also going to add the butter to this. Make sure to stir all the ingredients well, and then we're going to cover this with saran wrap and set a towel on top. I normally set this on top of my oven. I turn on the oven so that it has a warm surface to sit on for a while. I'm going to set this aside for an hour to rise. In the same bowl that I melted the butter in, I'm also going to use to make the filling. Place 172 grams or 3/4 of a cup butter in the bowl, along with 172 grams or 3/4 of a cup of brown sugar. Then add 16 grams or 3 tablespoons of cinnamon to this. I usually set this aside to bring to room temperature before I stir, or you can also microwave for 10 seconds. Once the dough has risen for an hour, add about a half a cup of the gluten-free flour you set aside earlier and mix well. Now I am taking out a baking pan and placing a piece of parchment on top. This is a slightly bigger pan than standard. I think it's about 18 inches by 21, but you can definitely use a regular size, but your rolls might not be the same size in the end. Placing the dough on top and adding a generous amount of flour, roll out the dough with a wooden rolling pin. I like doing it this way because the sides of the pan work as a guide in how thick the dough turns out to be. The parchment paper will help me roll it later on because gluten-free tends to end up being a little bit more moist than regular dough. Add more flour to this if it starts to stick to the rolling pin really bad. I then take the filling after I've mixed it together, put dollops on the top, making sure the filling is evenly distributed. Using a spatula, I spread the filling out. You can take this all the way to the edges if you wish. I then take the pan and place it in the refrigerator for about an hour. After the dough has firmed up a bit in the refrigerator, I then take it back out and use a bench scraper to help me loosen the sides of it. Starting on one end, I start to roll the dough. I always have a little bit of trouble at first to roll the dough, but don't panic, just trust the process. Once you get your hand underneath the parchment, you can use it to help you roll it the rest of the way. As you can see, the parchment really helps make it a beautifully rolled dough. I then wrap the dough with the parchment and place it back in the refrigerator for another 30 minutes to an hour. Take the rolled dough back out of the refrigerator, and then I use a serrated knife at this point to help score the dough in the places where I'll be cutting it. I don't measure it, but you definitely can. And then I cut them to get about 12 rolls. I'm also cutting off the ends. You can definitely still bake the ends and eat them, they just won't be as pretty. I then place them into a baking pan, and from here you can place saran wrap on top of them and freeze. Or you can go ahead and bake them. If you're taking them from the freezer, you'll want to put them in the refrigerator the night before to have them ready to bake the next day. You can put them in a big pan, or you can do singles. When I bake them, I turn on my oven again and let them sit on top with saran wrap and a towel covering them. But I would just let them sit there for 30 minutes. Then I place them in the oven at 350. For a single, I do 20 minutes, and for a big pan, I would say it would take about 30 for them to finish. And you test them by placing a finger on the dough, and if it is firm, they're ready to go. If it's too soft, then just let them bake a little bit longer. And all of this depends on your oven too. Once they are taken out of the oven, I usually top them with my cream cheese icing. This frosting is also vegan and very good. If you want this recipe, please let me know in the comments and I can post it later on. And trust me, you won't miss the dairy with this cream cheese. But you can also just use powdered sugar with a little bit of water added to it until you get the right consistency. These are so good fresh and such a crowd pleaser, especially for those that miss cinnamon rolls because of a diet restriction. So if you know someone who might benefit from this recipe, please share it. As you can see, I'm having a hard time putting this down. Thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more recipes like this one. And I hope you have a wonderful day.